The desert wind howled, a symphony of desolation that mirrored the storm brewing inside me, a storm that began with 3 devastating sentences in a PDF. My name is Caleb, a 45-year-old staff sergeant with a 75th Ranger Regiment. I'd been enduring the relentless heat and dust of Helmand Province for nearly 4 months when Seraphina decided she was done waiting. The subject line of the email was a blunt instrument. Let's be pragmatic about this. Pragmatic. That word, so cold and clinical, perfectly encapsulated the end of 13 years of marriage, delivered with the efficiency of a digital attachment. The message itself was equally concise, a brutal trinity of facts. She'd already filed the paperwork. Our joint account was a barren wasteland, and her new life coach, Silas, was now comfortably ensconced in our home in Portland, Oregon. I read it twice, each word a fresh wound. Then, with a numb precision born of years in combat, I closed my laptop, the screen a black mirror reflecting nothing. I showered in the communal stalls, the lukewarm water doing little to wash away the sudden chill that had settled deep in my bones. Dressed for my shift, I said nothing, offered no hint of the seismic shift that had just occurred in my world. Later that night, back in my bunk, I composed my reply. A single word that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken feelings. Understood. That was it. No pleas, no recriminations, no threats. Jax, my bunkmate, a wiry Texan with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, noticed something was off. "You good, man?" he grunted, not bothering to look up from his well-worn copy of Lonesome Dove. "Yeah," I replied, my voice a rough whisper. "Just some stuff back home." He nodded, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes. Military guys, we understand when to leave things alone. The truth was, I wasn't surprised. Not really. 6 months before my deployment, the subtle tremors had begun. Seraphina stopped asking about my day, her once eager inquiries replaced by a detached politeness. She started working late at the Holistic Wellness Center, where she managed the front desk, claiming a newfound passion for energetic alignment. Then came the thrice-weekly trips to the gym, though her physique remained stubbornly unchanged. New clothes, an entirely new circle of conscious living friends I'd never met, and passwords on her phone that now locked me out. I never confronted her, never descended into the murky waters of suspicion, checking her messages or trailing her like a jealous fool. That wasn't my way, but I wasn't blind either. So I began making my own quiet moves, precautions rather than accusations. Nothing dramatic, just a series of deliberate steps. I secured vital documents, my birth certificate, our marriage license, the deed to our house, thankfully. Only my name was on it, a remnant of the Vallone's requirements in a climate-controlled storage unit across town. My grandfather's battered Swiss watch and my mother's delicate Victorian silver locket, heirlooms that whispered of a different kind of permanence, joined them. I also opened a separate account at a different bank, discreetly diverting a portion of my pay there. Not enough to raise suspicion, but enough to ensure I wouldn't be starting from absolute zero if, or rather when, things went south. The night before I deployed, she hugged me at the airport. "Stay safe, okay?" Her eyes were dry, devoid of the usual welling tears, as if she were bidding farewell to a casual acquaintance, not a husband heading to a war zone. I should have known then, should have seen the stark outline of the ending. But a foolish, stubborn part of me still clung to hope, still whispered that I might be wrong. I wasn't. What Seraphina didn't know was that I had quietly, meticulously, prepared for this moment. And what she fundamentally failed to grasp was that while I never start fights, I always finish them. I met Seraphina at a friend's art gallery opening in Bend, Oregon, back in 2010. I was home between tours, crashing with my buddy Marcus. She was fresh out of holistic health coaching school, though she ended up working admin at the wellness center instead. "Less cosmic drama," she joked. 8 months later, we were married. Seraphina used to say she was proud of my service, though she never quite understood it. Her father was an organic grocer, her brother a yoga instructor, no military lineage there. She'd occasionally ask when I was going to get a real job, not quite grasping that after 15 years, the Army wasn't just a job. It was my career, my lifeblood. We bought our house in 2014, a modest 3-bedroom bungalow with a small, manicured yard in a quiet neighborhood. It was ours. My name was the sole one on the mortgage, thanks to the loan, but I'd added her to the deed. Because that's what married people do, right? Share things. My father died a year after we married, a sudden heart attack while pruning his beloved rose bushes. My mother followed 3 years later, lung cancer. Though she'd never touched a cigarette in her life, they left me some money, not a fortune, but enough for Seraphina and me to pay off our student loans and still have a decent cushion. I deployed 4 times during our marriage, Afghanistan twice, Syria twice. Each time I came home, Seraphina seemed a little more distant, a little more restless, like an actress trapped in a role she'd outgrown. I didn't sign up to be a ranger wife, she told me once, after I'd mentioned possibly re-upping for another 4 years. I'm tired of being alone all the time. I understood that. I truly did. But the Army was the only place I ever felt truly belonged. I was good at my job. People depended on me. In 2019, the subtle shifts began morphing into something more pronounced. Seraphina grew irritated when I called during her goddess circles. She started talking about how her friend Willow had divorced her husband and was now manifesting her best life. Then came the barbed comments about how we didn't really have anything in common anymore. I suggested counseling. She shrugged it off, claiming we were fine, just navigating a vibrational shift. Then came the late nights at work, the weekends away with friends I'd never met, the increasingly revealing activewear, the gym membership she rarely used. I should have confronted her then, perhaps. But that's not how I operate. Never have. My father, a man of few words but profound wisdom, taught me to think before I speak, to be certain before I act. So I watched, and I prepared, quietly, because my gut, honed by years of combat, was screaming that something was coming. And in this life, you learn to trust your gut. 2 weeks after that devastating email, I sat in the mess hall, picking at a bland plate of Emrys when my phone vibrated, a notification from our bank app. Another withdrawal, $88,500. Almost everything that was left. I set my fork down, the clatter echoing in the sudden silence of my mind, and opened the app. The joint account balance hovered at a paltry $22.37. Our savings, the $47,000 we'd meticulously built over years, was completely gone, vanished into an account I didn't recognize. Rodriguez, one of the younger guys from my unit, glanced over. Bad news, Staff Sergeant. I locked my phone. Nah, just some account stuff. That night, I called our bank from the base phone center. Seraphina had been systematically moving money for weeks, they informed me. Small amounts at first, then larger, more brazen transfers. The truly substantial withdrawals had started the day after I deployed. I hung up the phone and stood in the dim hallway for a long time, watching the blurred figures of my comrades, laughing, calling their kids, their wives, their parents. Normal life unfolding all around me, while mine burned to ash. That's when Jax found me. "Heard from Alvarez you looked like you'd seen a ghost at dinner," he said, his voice softer than usual. "What's up?" I don't usually share personal stuff, but Jax had pulled me out of a tight spot in Kandahar once, when in Wide had detonated too close for comfort. I trusted him. "My wife emptied our accounts," I stated flatly, the words tasting like grit, "and moved her boyfriend into our house. Sent divorce papers while I was on patrol last week." Jax didn't offer platitudes or empty sympathies. He just asked, "What's your plan?" "Not sure yet," I admitted. He nodded slowly. "Let me know if you need anything." Sleep was a foreign concept that night. I pulled out my laptop and logged into our home security system, a detail Seraphina had likely forgotten I could access remotely. The cameras painted a stark picture. A strange, beat-up Jeep Grand Cherokee in our driveway. A man I'd never seen before walking our golden retriever, Apollo, using my favorite coffee mug, even wearing my old Timberwolves sweatshirt. And there was Seraphina, laughing in the kitchen I'd meticulously renovated during my last leave. Something inside me shifted. Not anger, not rage. Something colder, clearer, a quiet, terrifying resolve. I closed the laptop and pulled out my phone. A list began to form. Call Ben Army Buddy, who'd become a sharp corporate lawyer. Check the Valone terms. Contact Master Sergeant Hayes about emergency leave. Review home refinance documents, something Seraphina had casually mentioned last year. Check the security on my military pension accounts. I didn't feel sad anymore. I didn't even feel angry. I felt focused, like I was planning a mission. This wasn't about emotion now. This was about strategy. At 05 Zuzur, before my shift started, I sent an email to Ben with the subject line, "Need legal help. Discreet and urgent." His reply came an hour later. "Call me. Secure line only." When I hung up from that call, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to threaten. I didn't even need to confront her. I just needed to wait and watch and let her own actions become the trap. 2 months later, I was back on American soil. I didn't tell Seraphina I was coming home. No calls, no texts. I checked into a nondescript motel in downtown Portland under a different name and contacted Ben. We met at a greasy diner 10 miles outside of town, the aroma of stale coffee and burnt bacon clinging to the air. "You look like hell," Ben said, sliding into the booth. His usually immaculate suit rumpled. "Feel like it, too," I replied, forcing a grim smile. Ben pushed a thick folder across the table. "Everything we discussed. The house deed, loan documents, bank statements, and this." He pulled out a separate, crisp document. "Found something interesting when I was digging into your finances. It was a refinance application with my signature on it, except it wasn't my signature. Not quite. Someone had tried to copy it, but the details were subtly, damningly wrong. The middle initial was off, and the stroke pattern wasn't mine." "Seraphina did this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer, the cold certainty settling in my gut. Ben nodded. 3 months ago. Used the equity to pull out $330,000. Your signature is required for that, since the Valone is in your name only. Forge my signature. Take out a loan against our house. Then clear out our accounts and divorce me," I mused, the absurdity of it almost making me laugh. "Busy woman." "It gets better," Ben added, his voice dropping slightly. "She listed her boyfriend as a co-applicant. Silas has a record. 2 Deweys and a fraud charge from 2019. I took a deep breath. The diner's stale air suddenly thick and unbreathable. "What are my options?" "Several," Ben said. "But first, you need to decide what you want." I thought about it. I wanted what was legally mine, and I wanted her to understand consequences. I want what's legally mine, and I want her to understand consequences. Ben smiled, a glint in his eye that I hadn't seen since our days in the legal aid clinic during our first tour. "Then here's what we do." The next day, I drove past our house. Silas's beat-up Jeep was gone, but Seraphina's hybrid sedan was in the driveway. I parked a few blocks down the street and watched for a while, a ghost in my own neighborhood. The urge to just knock on the door, to confront her, was almost overwhelming. But that wasn't the plan. Instead, I drove to the bank. I met with the loan officer who had processed the refinance. A young woman named Miss Chen, her name tag gleaming. I showed her my military ID, showed her the true signature on my driver's license. Then, with a carefully controlled hand, I slid the forged documents across her desk. Her face went pale, the color draining from it like water from a sieve. "I'll need to report this immediately," she stammered, her eyes wide with alarm. "I understand," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. I've already filed a police report. That night, a text message pinged on my burner phone. It was from Seraphina. "Who have you been talking to at the bank?" Silas said someone was asking questions. I didn't respond. The next day, I went to the Multnomah County Clerk's office. I filed paperwork contesting the refinance due to fraud. I registered a formal notice that no changes to the property could be made without my direct, in-person presence. 2 days later, Seraphina called. I let it go to voicemail. "Nathan, we need to talk. The bank called about the house. What are you doing? If this is about the divorce, we can discuss it like adults." Like adults. The same words from her initial email. Now a bitter echo. I still didn't respond. Ben called that afternoon. "They froze the refinance money," he announced, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "And there's more. Your wife's boyfriend has been driving your truck, right? The Ford F-150 registered in your name?" "Yeah," I confirmed. "He got pulled over this morning," Ben continued. "Driving on a suspended license from those Deweys. They impounded the vehicle." "Good," I said, a rare, genuine smile touching my lips. "He also had some interesting things in the truck." Ben paused, and I knew this was going to be big. "Prescription pads. From the Holistic Wellness Center where Seraphina works. They weren't blank." I closed my eyes. "She's been stealing prescription pads." "Looks that way," Ben confirmed. "The police are investigating." I hung up and sat on the edge of the motel bed. This was getting bigger than I'd anticipated. A small, almost forgotten part of me wanted to call Seraphina to warn her. Old habits. But then I remembered the security camera footage, the casual way she'd given away my house, my dog, my life, as if they meant nothing. No, this was the path now. I couldn't turn back. And honestly, I didn't want to. I met with the bank fraud investigator the next morning. His name was Mr. Albright, a short man with a perpetually furrowed brow and a coffee stain on his tie. "This happens more often than you'd think," he said, spreading documents across his desk. "Spouse deploys, other spouse sees an opportunity." "What happens now?" I asked. "We've frozen the funds from the fraudulent refinance," Albright explained, adjusting his glasses. "But there's a problem. Some of the money's already gone." "How much?" "About half. $14,600. I leaned forward. "Where did it go?" Albright hesitated, his gaze shifting uncomfortably. "I'm not supposed to share that information." "It's my house," I stated, my voice firm. "My name forged, my money stolen." He nodded slowly, then turned his computer screen toward me. "These are the transfers out of the refinance account." I scanned the list. Multiple transfers. To someone named Dominic Vance. Not Silas. Someone else entirely. I'd never heard of him. "Who's Dominic Vance?" I asked. Albright shrugged. "Not my department, but you should ask your lawyer to subpoena these records." I called Ben as soon as I left the bank. "Dominic Vance," he repeated, his voice thoughtful. "Let me run a check." An hour later, he called back. "Got it. Dominic Vance is a real estate agent, specializes in quick sales, cash deals, off-market properties." The realization hit me like a physical blow, a cold wave washing over me. She was planning to sell our house. "Looks that way," Ben confirmed. "The deposits were probably earnest money to get him moving on a listing. But here's where it gets interesting. Vance has done business with Silas Blackwood before." "Silas Blackwood? Is that my wife's boyfriend?" "Yes. They've closed 3 deals together in the past 2 years." I sat down hard on a nearby park bench, trying to process this new, chilling layer of betrayal. So this wasn't just Seraphina leaving me for some guy. This was, what? A planned operation? "Maybe," Ben said carefully. "I did some digging into Silas Blackwood. He has a pattern. Gets involved with women going through divorce, or with deployed spouses. 3 cases I found so far. Each time, the woman's home gets sold well below market value to one of Vance's clients. Blackwood gets a cut. Then he moves on. And Seraphina, I whispered, the name tasting like ash. She knew about this? Hard to say, Ben replied. Maybe she's a victim, too. Or maybe she's in on it. I rubbed my face, the coarse stubble scratching my palm. This wasn't just about Seraphina betraying me anymore. This was something bigger, something calculated, and other military families like mine, had been victims. What do we do? I've already contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, Ben said. This crosses state lines, involves military personnel, and Vallones. They're very interested. That night, I sat in my motel room with a lukewarm beer, replaying everything. Had Seraphina been playing me our entire marriage, or had she simply gotten swept up in Silas's insidious scheme? Did it even matter? My phone buzzed. Seraphina again. Nathan, please call me. The bank is saying something about fraud, and Silas got arrested for driving your truck. I don't understand what's happening. I stared at the message for a long time, the words blurring. Then, with a slow, deliberate finger, I typed, "Who is Dominic Vance?" 3 dots appeared as she started typing. Then stopped, started again, stopped. Finally, I don't know what you're talking about. $14,600. Multiple transfers. House listing. I wrote, each word a hammer blow. No response for 10 minutes. Then, it's not what you think. I turned off my phone and went to bed. The next morning, Ben called. FBI wants to meet. They've been investigating Blackwood and Vance for months. You're not the first, but you might be the case that breaks it open. For the first time since receiving that divorce email, I felt something close to satisfaction. Not because my marriage was over, but because the truth, cold and unvarnished, was finally coming out. I met with the FBI agents at their field office in Portland. Agent Ramirez, a sharp woman with an intimidatingly direct gaze, and Agent O'Connell, a quiet man who scribbled notes meticulously. They recorded my statement, taking copies of all the documents Ben and I had painstakingly gathered. Your case helps establish a pattern, Agent Ramirez explained, her voice crisp. Shows intent, organization, makes it a conspiracy rather than isolated incidents. What about Seraphina? I asked, the word ex-wife already forming on my tongue. The agents exchanged looks. We're still determining her level of involvement, O'Connell said carefully. Did she ever mention financial difficulties? Pressure to sell the house. I thought back. She kept saying we were house poor, that we should downsize. I didn't see the need. Our mortgage payments were perfectly manageable on my salary. Ramirez made a note. When did that start? About 6 months ago, I replied. Around the time she must have met Silas. And the refinance? O'Connell pressed. Never discussed it with me. She forged my signature while I was deployed. They asked more questions, took more notes. When we finished, Ramirez handed me her card. We'll be in touch. In the meantime, don't confront your wife or Blackwood. We need to build this case carefully. I nodded. Understood. That evening, I drove to our neighborhood again, parking down the street from our house. Silas's Jeep was back. Must have gotten it out of impound. Seraphina's car was gone. My phone buzzed. Text from Seraphina. We need to talk. In person. Meet me at Forest Park tomorrow. I showed the text to Ben over breakfast the next day. Don't go, he advised. Nothing good can come from talking to her right now. I won't, I said. But I want to know what she's doing today, while she thinks I'm meeting her. We drove to our house at 9:30 a.m., parking across the street. At 9:45, Seraphina came out, got in her car, and drove away, heading toward Forest Park. Now what? Ben asked. Now we wait, I said. 20 minutes later, a sleek black sedan pulled up, a real estate agent logo on the door. Dominic Vance. Silas came out to greet him. They talked in the driveway, then went inside. "Should we follow them?" Ben asked, already reaching for his keys. I shook my head. "No need. I installed security cameras last year, interior and exterior. They upload to cloud storage." Ben smiled, a genuine, wide grin. "You didn't mention that before." "Never came up," I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the security app and angled the screen so Ben could see. Vance and Silas were in our living room. Vance was taking photos. Silas was pointing at features of the house, a smug look on his face. I turned up the volume. "Should list by the end of the week," Vance was saying, his voice smooth and professional. "I've got a buyer interested already. Cash offer as usual." "How much?" Silas asked, his eyes gleaming. $420. We list at $470. They offer $420. Everybody's happy." "What about the husband?" Silas chuckled. "Seraphina says he's causing trouble." Vance waved dismissively. "Military guys are all the same. They make noise, but they've got deployments, responsibilities. He'll take a settlement to make it go away." I turned to Ben. "You getting this?" He was already recording the feed on his phone. Every word. I forwarded the security feed access to Agent Ramirez with a short message. "Happening now." 30 minutes later, our house was surrounded by FBI vehicles. I watched from down the street as agents led Vance and Silas out in handcuffs, their smug expressions replaced by looks of utter disbelief. My phone rang. Agent Ramirez. "Got them on tape discussing the fraud scheme," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Plus conspiracy, wire fraud, and attempting to sell property under false pretenses. We're going to need a formal statement from you." "Of course," I said. "And Mr. Briggs," she added, a slight pause. "Your wife just arrived at the scene. She's distressed." I looked down the street. Seraphina was standing on our lawn, hands clamped over her mouth, watching as FBI agents carried boxes of documents from our house. "What happens to her?" I asked. "That depends," Ramirez said. "On what she knew, and on what you want." I watched Seraphina for a long moment. 13 years of marriage. Good years, at the beginning, before whatever this had become. "I just want what's right," I said finally. The federal case moved swiftly. Silas and Vance both took plea deals, implicating each other and several other conspirators in what turned out to be a 3-state operation targeting military families. Seraphina maintained she knew nothing about the larger scheme, claiming Silas had convinced her I was hiding money, planning to leave her with nothing. She said the refinance was his idea. She'd just gone along with it. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, she agreed to a settlement. Full restitution of the stolen funds, forfeiture of any claim to the house or my military pension, and a signed confession about the forgery. In exchange, I didn't press charges. The divorce was finalized 6 months after that email from Hellman. No fault, clean break, all things considered. On the day the last paperwork was signed, I got a call from Agent Ramirez. Silas Blackwood was sentenced today. 8 years for fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Vance got 12. Thought you'd want to know. "Thank you," I said. "There's something else," she added. "We found evidence they've done this to 11 other military families. Your case helped us build the pattern. Those families might get their money back because of you." After we hung up, I sat on the porch of my rental apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. I thought about those other families, other men who deployed, thinking their homes and marriages were safe, only to come back to emptiness. I hadn't planned on being the one to bring down Silas and Vance's operation. I just wanted what was mine. But sometimes things work out in ways you don't expect. My phone buzzed. Text from Seraphina. "I never meant for things to end this way." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. A year later, I sold the house. Couldn't stand to live in it anymore. Too many memories, too much betrayal in those walls. I used the money to buy a small cabin outside of Missoula, Montana. 2 bedrooms, 10 acres of land, a clear creek running behind it. No neighbors for miles. I took early retirement from the Army. 20 years was enough. I'd given enough. I got a dog, a sturdy German shepherd named Scout, and started doing carpentry work for locals. Nothing fancy, but it kept my hands busy and paid the bills. My military pension covered the rest. Sometimes I thought about Seraphina. Wondered where she ended up. Ben heard she'd moved back to her hometown in Oregon, working at another wellness center. Starting over, I guess. I didn't hate her anymore. Didn't much feel anything about her, to be honest. She'd made her choices, and so had I. One evening, I got a letter from a woman in Fort Worth, Texas. Her husband was in the Air Force, deployed when Salas and Vance tried to run their scheme on her. The FBI had given her my name as part of the case. "You don't know me," she wrote, "but you saved our home. Thank you for fighting back when it would have been easier to just walk away." I read it twice, then pinned it to my refrigerator. Some days, when the silence got too loud or the memories too sharp, I'd look at that letter and remember that something good had come from all of it. Last I heard, Silas was still in prison. Vance, too. The system worked, for once. As for me, I was finding my way forward, one quiet day at a time, building something new. Something that couldn't be stolen or forged or betrayed. Something that was just mine.